Yeah, so tonight we're going to look at the ice cream. And again, I apologise if by the end of it you're craving sort of whipped cream and cherries and all the rest of it. So it's such a classic, a very classic British seaside invention, the Knickerbocker Glory. I believe it was it coined when cycling became big, because it was at the same time when women began to wear trousers, and so they used to go on cycling day trips out to the coast, and this ice cream was created to sort of celebrate in just before the First World War the sort of arrival of more female emancipation. So you wouldn't think the Knickerbocker Glory was a feminist icon, but there we go, it is. So it is just this classic, and I love this sort of like fan wafer at the top, which I think it really sort of sets it aside from being any old kind of ice cream. So, whereas in previous sessions we've sort of painted first and then drawn afterwards, we're going to do a little bit more drawing on this side. Where you've got things like glass and you've got reflections, it tends to sort of freak people out when they're starting, because you think, well, how am I going to get that in? But I always think, if you think of it almost like this being a surface pattern, so try not to see it as distortion, see it as if you've got like a textile or something that you can take the pattern from. And where you've got these really high points of white, that's always going to work better if you think about it, if we use the white of the paper for those high spots, because it's the brightest white we have. Because every time you put pigment or tone onto paper, you're giving it a colour. So you can't, unlike something like acrylic, where you can go back and add white highlights, which you can totally do. And if you get if your paint runs and you get too muddy with it, you can certainly go back with white acrylic and do a little bit of touching up at the end to kind of really bring up these white highlights. So where you've got the white sort of highlights in the glass, you've got this sort of cream area. So we're almost going to ignore those and kind of work around them to leave them as white spaces on the picture. Right, so let's just fixing that there. So when you're drawing something first, you want to keep your drawing with watercolour as minimal as possible, because if you've got too much pencil work on the page, it can sort of smudge into your paint, because it's not as what's the word, like, you know, it's not waterproof, unlike pen it can be, because it's graphite, so it does smudge and it does soften. So we're just going to very sort of like just use some quite light line to sort of map it out. Again, it's difficult to sort of concentrate too much on drawing when you're doing these classes, because drawing is actually, I think, more complicated in some ways than painting, or certainly more exacting. So the better at drawing you are, the better at painting you are. But I think you can get better results with paint when your drawing isn't as strong. I don't know. So if you're not brilliant at drawing, you might want to just try painting it, or just sort of give yourself some points to look at. But the key things really you want to think about is the neck of the sort of top of the vase, or the sundae glass. So I would just put in a little bit of a curved line on a horizontal, just to sort of like decide where that's going to be. And then I'm going to draw like a sort of a construction line, just a sort of long, almost like, think of it as like the spine of the glass going down. So I've got a sense of the proportion, which I hope you can just about see. I know it's a bit, if I turn my light out, it might be a bit dark, but you might, I don't think it's just about see the line. So we've got that, and then you have a similar shape, really. You've got where the sort of ankle of the glass is, we'll call it that, where it's wasted in, you've got another curve line kind of coming in the same sort of point. So you know that's got to come halfway in your line, and then it bells out into this, the fluted foot, and that's going to be another kind of curved line coming out. So you've almost got these sort of three, it's basically like a whole series of cylinders kind of coming down, and then you can roughly put in the shape of the outside of the glass, coming down to there, and then take it out to the foot. I've done this line quite big. You can then decide when you come down to it if you need to make your foot, actually, if I've over exaggerated the foot, that's fine, because if you just do a sweep of a line, then you can take from that line what you need. Then one of the key things to think about is the reflective quality and this sort of ice cream the cream on the top. So what you actually see is, because of the distortion of the glass, almost all of this area and quite a big part of this area here is actually going to be see-through. So you can kind of like almost map that off, and you'll notice the ice cream kind of comes and it's hovering above the base, isn't it? Because it comes down into the cup inside, but it doesn't come all the way down into the base. So I'm just fiddling with the perspective bit there. So you kind of have like the ice cream floating above the surface, something like that. So you've got a definite kind of grey tones happening here as opposed to the ice cream, literal ice cream colours. And then you've got this area at the top where it's very much sort of pressed in, and then up the top here we've got the sort of ice creamy bit, the creamy bit on the top. So this cherry is always fantastically, unless you've got a sort of slapdash ice cream person, there's lovely sort of like in the middle. I just have to slightly raise my camera so we can get all of that top bit in. And then we've got our wafer coming in at a steep angle sort of on that side, and then a fan over the top and coming in sort of to that side. So we've got the sort of that very iconic fan shape on the top, and then we've got the cream kind of doing its thing, and it's just very importantly just dripping over the front there, which I think is quite a nice touch to kind of give that softness, and we can just sort of map in where that sort of cream comes to. So we've got our basic sort of ice cream shape, and then with the sort of, we've got all this sort of like squished up fruit inside, sort of pressed against the glass. So if we sort of ignore that to begin with, what you do definitely have is a central panel through the middle of the glass, through this line here, which is sort of shows where the shadow comes, and then this side is much darker and this side is much lighter. So that's quite important to think about, because what we're going to do first is to do an underpaint with a pale lilac-y colour to sort of like just put in the shadows, because you've got these very delicate colours. If we try and mix up all these tonal shades, it can get quite confusing, they can get a bit muddy. So if we think about just putting our shadow areas in first, then we can use the same colour, and then we paint over it, it will automatically kind of have the shadow waiting for us. So I mean, there's lots of ways you can handle sort of drawing, and one of the things you can do is when you've got the pencil in place, you can get a pen and then kind of draw it in pen so that the black line becomes part of the image. It becomes a bit more sort of a bit more like a design, or sort of again a bit more illustrative. So, and the good thing about the pen, of course, is that it doesn't run. If it's a waterproof pen, it doesn't run. So we're going to do that on this occasion, and we're going to put some of the detail in as if it was pattern, and then once we've got some of the pen work in, we can take out the pencil, and it's hopefully not going to smudge. With my one, I still think that the foot isn't quite right, so this is where drawing is tricky. If you find it really hard to get the front curves, which I'm sort of struggling a bit with, but you can always decide to go on a very kind of flat illustrative route and actually sort of almost cut the lines straight across and make it much flatter looking, so it becomes much more like a textile design. But otherwise it's just going to be trying to swing that curve out far enough so that it looks like it can sit on a table. It's always an endless battle to get those sort of perspectives to work. I mean, this is why I think of myself as an illustrator, because if I can't draw something fantastically and it can't get it to work, I just cheat and do other things, because for me it's creating the end image and making that work that is important, not necessarily how you get there. So I'm a great fan of cheating. Right, so I'm going to now put some pen work on top of here, and this is quite good because sometimes you've got like your pencil and it's a bit hesitant and it's kind of hovering around, and then when you come and draw with a pen, you suddenly kind of see better the way you want things to go. So I'm going to start off again with this sort of rim of the glass, and I've always weirdly, I mean, I love drawing in pencil, and then sometimes I think actually there's something about drawing in pen that kind of makes you, because you can't be hesitant with it. You have to just do it, otherwise it's not going to happen. You have to. Sometimes I find that improves my drawing because it kind of puts me on the spot, and I have to make a decision, and you know, I have to be a bit more confident about my application of line. But I'm just going to roughly put in some marks to indicate where the bottom of the glass comes, then I really want to get this. I've got these sort of arches of light kind of coming through, so I want to sort of almost just draw those in like sort of hoops, kind of like coming up the side, almost like arrowheads sort of in there. And then I've got this sort of area of ice cream that's floating, contained in the glass. I always remember being slightly fascinated, thinking that the ice cream, if you could make the glass disappear, the ice cream would be the shape of the glass. And that sounds like a weird thing to say, to be interested in, but it is kind of that you give it this form of the glass going on underneath. Then in this top area here, there's a lovely bit where, if you can see on this sort of on the right hand edge here, where you get the sort of cream and it isn't quite into the glass and it leaves a little bit of space. And that really, then when you then draw in the side of the glass, that kind of really starts to give that feeling of the way the ice cream is suspended and the way you get air pockets in it. And that kind of is quite a useful sort of technique. And then you've got the shape of the cream at the top, where it's sort of pushed into that sort of surface. And again, I don't worry too much if it isn't an exact replica. I just want that feeling of that sort of white coming through here. I've got this on the top here is this lovely, it's obviously, this is someone's beautifully organised bit of food advertising, so it's got this lovely swirl on the top, look really lovely, kind of coming down, so I can see in the ice cream that lovely kind of curl shape coming through, and then a swirl kind of coming up to where the cherry is, and then just sort of see it initially as if it's like a pattern that you're drawing. It's sort of just like try and sort of see it as find the edge in it, find it like a sort of textile pattern, or as I said, or something quite graphic that you're drawing in. And then we've got the edge of it coming around here, and that gives this lovely swirl. And when we're coming, what we'll do is we'll paint in using the purple paint to put the shadows in. This edge here, we can keep it quite sort of pure white, just that sort of bumpy kind of feel coming down there. The cream at the top comes up in a little heap around that cherry, and then so we don't see the bottom of the cherry, we just see that bottom, we actually see the edge of the ice cream doing that swirl, and then we see the bright red, that's going to be bright red nose of cherry kind of popping up there, and that has that, and that allows us, that helps us to see that the cherry is sunk into that cream. It's not just literally hovering on the top, it's actually stuck into it, so we get that feeling. And then where we've got these we've got lovely patterns inside here, so I can see wherever this dark, presumably chocolate of some kind, sort of weird dark blob kind of shape of chocolate. Again, this is, it's all very abstract because it's melting against the glass, so whatever shape you do, as long as you make it work for your ice cream, it's not really going to be a huge problem. No one, again, is going to come along and map it across exactly. Then we can then see it's like a sort of kidney bean shape, isn't there, of chocolate with sort of cream coming around it. And this sort of marbling effect is what we want to get, because that's the sort of very iconic way we've seen ice cream. Again, it doesn't matter exactly what the shape is, as long as you're getting these sort of colours. And there's a sort of a white stripe of vanilla ice cream going down, and they've got I can see, a sort of strawberry. But we can only see this sort of piece of it here, because then we get a big shine on this side, so we can't see it anymore. So we just see this little hint of strawberry kind of in there. And then there's another sort of like chocolate, isn't there, sort of circle about sort of around there. So if you just don't try and analyse what, as in, just trying to sort of like fit all these shapes together in a way that's going to work for your picture, and they'll start to make sense when we sort of get the colours in and so forth. Then on this side, there's a sort of bank of vanilla. We've got that line in the glass, which is where the shadow line kind of comes. So the vanilla sort of comes out on this side and joins into that, and then it comes across, doesn't it? And there's a slight angle, and it comes all the way to the edge, and then there's like a strawberry, like a cloud of sort of pinkness down the side. And this bit here where the kidney bean shape is, that comes up into that space in white, and then there's some pale pink sort of beyond it, and there's a little bit of dark there, isn't there? There's like something, again, chocolate, but it's not quite over all the way to the edge. It's sort of like a little bubble of chocolate and some sort of strawberry kind of in there. So we're just sort of seeing these patterns inside the ice cream, and when we add the colours in, we'll have the sort of feeling we want. If we look on this side here, we've got a really strong highlight, and then there's a slice of cherry red that comes down sort of like, but it very importantly leaves that sort of little margin of white on the side, so we can tell that this part of the ice cream is actually going to be quite dark compared to that highlight point. It's going to be if you were to isolate that colour on its own, it's almost quite a mid-tone grey, but you wouldn't think of that as being a colour in ice cream. And that light carries on down that sort of side a bit, and then there's sort of like a red, again like another red bit. It's not quite touching, which is quite good, and that comes across in a sort of slice of red, and then we've got this big pink section in the middle, haven't we? Sort of very juicy, jammy sort of stuff, strawberry sauce, I imagine. So that stuff that's really, really sweet, puts your teeth on edge a bit. And they've got that pink in there. And there's maybe a dark sort of section of very dark strawberry pink in there. So although it's sort of, we're seeing it almost just like I said, like a sort of piece of pattern work. Then I've got over above this sort of the deep well of strawberry sauce here, there's a little sort of funnel of it coming up into that pink ice cream. Into the white ice cream, so we get this sort of dark pink coming up into underneath that sort of here, and then this bit is all very confusing. I can see my strawberry seam of strawberry comes across and then dives down the side into that there. And I remember as a child kind of like thinking, I've hit a seam of strawberry, and I've hit, like you mine down with your spoon, wouldn't you, and find it. And there's quite a grey bit above that, which is obviously again with a bit of an air pocket, and we're seeing some sort of glass through there, and there's a nice sort of small pattern next to it. I'm squashing mine in. It's not perfect, but again, I don't really care. It's not a problem. And then I've got a dark bit on the side coming down there, and that's where I'm seeing the glass, seeing the distance through the glass coming in there. And then there's sort of like this hole that we've got here in the ice. So that's sort of got, hopefully, these sort of weird squishy squashy, almost like a lava lamp of ice cream shapes. And again, what's lovely about it is you don't have to be, if you take from the image the key elements, the fact that you've got these areas of really hard highlight, you've got these abstract blueberry shapes against the glass, you've got these moments of refraction where you get these sort of horseshoe shapes, you can use those. They don't have to be the same, but you just use those sort of qualities. If you want to look at this fluty foot here, which is always tricky because it gives you lots of refraction and so forth in there, the key thing I think is this shape here. It's only subtle, but you can see in the background you've got this sort of piece of shadow here, and it kind of creeps around the front of the glass. So if you sort of at least get that bit in, so you've got a bit of shadow here, and then you bring it round the front of the glass. I've gone a bit wobbly there, but it's still quite difficult to draw and talk and think about what I'm doing next. So just going to bring that in around here. Somehow that's very classic, kind of that shadow of where you get that, because it's kind of what that is. It's picking up what's above here and then kind of throwing it round this sort of very small circle. So that's a very classic shape to think about. And then again, there's a very dark grey bit, isn't there? If you then look at it, there's like a dark arrowhead kind of coming in here, and we've got this sort of section here which is almost just sort of, there's like a sort of grey wobbly, sort of burgundy grey wobbly kind of lines, one there, and there's sort of one behind as well. So you can just kind of do an approximation of that. And then there's this lovely, again, these sort of horseshoe shapes. It's got a piece of white, then it's got a white horseshoe above coming down, and there's like a sort of this another burgundy line coming through here, and it's coming down underneath it, and that's starting to get some refraction. And then this side here, there's a big stripe of white, obviously a reflection of white vanilla ice cream coming in there. And you've probably got lights reflecting in here as well. And then there's this grey sort of swirly bit on the side, which is quite dark. Triangle of burgundy in between. And then one thing which I think is important to get is the edge of the foot of the glass, this sort of rim. There's quite a strong grey section there coming round, so into that part there, and then coming along the foot. And I know mine is wobbly, but I'm not worried too much about it. I think we should all know by now that wobbly is good. So we're going to bring those sort of lines through here, and then a little bit of darkness on this side. And again, there's sort of some horseshoe shapes in here. I've kind of run out of room for them, but let's kind of have one overlapping in there. And that's sort of just starting to get some shapes in, and then we can take maybe just, if you see something and you think that would look good, if it exaggerate it and put it in, because that kind of gives us that slightly fluted feel to that glass. So that's sort of going in there. any of those shapes will work. It's just to kind of acknowledge that it is shiny. And the last thing we've got to sort of think about really is the fan up here. I'm going to slightly, now that, why I quite like doing the pencil then the pen is now when I look at that, I think my fan that I've drawn is too narrow. It's too narrow and it's too thin, because if I look at the space between the top of the cherry and the wafer that's above it, it's only about the same distance as the cherry. So I can then change that. You could do it in pencil first and then do it in pen, but for speed I'm going to just take the edge of my wafer shorter and then bring the top curve of it. I'm trying to get round the camera and not to block it too much, but maybe if I just draw it and then you can see. So it's a bit more of an angle. There we are. So I think that's looking better. And then it's sort of really useful, because that's why I would say don't rush to rub out all your construction marks, because you can use them to say, if that's definitely wrong, I know I don't want to redraw that, so I can then got something to compare it to, and this feels like a better kind of curve. I think it can still come this way a little bit. Nothing wrong with it, a bit of exaggeration, make it into a proper exaggerated fan, and then I can bring it back down into plunging into the ice cream again. And for me, I think that's a better shape. And then I've got this lovely corrugated, again, which I know this always sounds, I go into sort of, thoughts around this, but there's something really Art Deco about that fan shape. And I think it's a motif that from a design point of view, you see it in 1920s, that interwar kind of period, in the sun rays and the sort of Bakelite radios. And there's something really nostalgic about those rays and that shape, because it's almost like a shorthand for a sunset, for a sun, isn't it? It's almost like saying this is sunny food, and the wafer's got this sort of sunny feel. I know it's quite a lot to put on a small dry biscuity thing, but I think that that's quite an iconic thing. So I want to make sure that I can see my wafer sort of fan effect. Now, you might prefer to do this with a ruler, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, but what you've got here is a line going. It's like a fan fold, so you've got one side of the line in shadow and one not. So if you think you're going to get a bit lost, you might want to just do a couple, and then we can get some shadow onto it, and then might make more sense of it. So you've got shadow, non-shadow, shadow, non-shadow. Just try and see it as lined to begin with. Again, if you find it difficult to follow what's happening here, make it work for your fan. So you can just look at this and divide it up relatively evenly as possible. And if you end up with more or less fan bits than this, don't worry about it, because make your picture work in its way. Because it will be, if you try and fit in something that, you're looking over here and then you find you've got one too big one, it tends to get you a bit lost. So I'm just putting some rays in. You get the angle at the top as well of the and remember last week we looked at the beach huts. You could see that angle against the sort of the edge of the boarding, and the same with this one. You get a sort of like a little angle. You don't see it on that one because that's all lit, so you come into that one, and as you come round again, you can just see those sort of angled shapes just at the top. And again, mine's probably too low, but I don't worry about that because I want it to work in the picture that I'm doing. As I come round, this one is quite high lit, but so what I see at the top is actually like a triangle as it comes round, and this last one is a little hint of triangle just coming in there. But it's just enough to kind of change that shape. I'm sorry if it's a bit too pale. I don't know if I put my light back on, it might be different now that it's in pen. So that gives me an outline. Now, if I was doing, because my style of working is to put a lot of pen detail in, that's sort of one of the things that I really like doing is just packing loads of pen work, because I'm more of a pen artist than anything. If I was going to give myself a label, I would probably do a bit more pen work. I'm going to put a little bit of extra line into that cream, but it's not how everyone works. So, I'm not going to put loads in tonight, and you might decide that you're more of you want to keep it much more simple and much more about the paint. It's up to you to decide how you want to draw things and to find your own kind of way forwards. But if it was me, I'd be putting more pen work in, but I'm going to make myself stop now, is basically what I'm saying. Then I'm going to just... what do you think? Oh, yes, here it is. Got my eraser. I'm going to take out the pencil marks now, because they do have this habit of muddying the watercolour. So I'm just going to go through and if you weren't interested about what pencil I'm using, as sometimes people want to know these things, I tend to use these retractable rotary pencils with very thin leads because, again, I think I'm more of a pen and ink artist than anything. I find that's the closest in feel to a pen, so I find it works. But particularly if you're using a much softer sketching pencil, I'd always recommend, if you can, take out some of the pencil marks before you get into the paint, so you're leaving with a very minimal surface. On a different subject it might be much harder to take them out because it's less sort of geometric. However, the softer the pencil, the more it tends to become quite intrusive into the paint. It'll sort of bleed into the paint, and then again, of course, if you get a very hard pencil, it tends to make a little, almost like it almost etches the surface of your paper, and that tends to which can be really useful because you can use it to create very sharp edges, which then sort of like form like barriers against the paint. But if you don't want it to happen, you can guarantee that it probably will where you don't want it to. Right, so I've just cleared off all my pencil work, so now I've got my pen work. Again, you could do loads of things. You could add extra sort of pen lines. We could get all sorts of movement happening in here, but we're not going to overcomplicate things. So as I said, the first thing I want to do is to use an underpaint or quite a controlled application of shadow, and I almost want to imagine this in black and white and just putting in the areas of shadow. So for this I tend to use a lilac colour. This is when I realise that my palette is still in the kitchen from where I washed it up earlier, but I'm not going to run and get it. I'll just struggle on with the one I've got. I don't want to interrupt things. So get some water. We're not going to put water onto our paper first. We're going to be working on quite dry paper because this is a much more sort of controlled image. You could put water on and you could get some lovely spongy kind of effects into your strawberry, but we might do that but in a much more controlled way. We're not going to just be like wetting the whole paper and working on it. So we're looking for a lilac colour, and I'm just going to wipe a bit of my palette so it's not too grubby. So you immediately discover the downside of splashing out and buying separate palettes is that if they're not with you when you need them, they're quite hard to use. So I want sort of a purpley lilac, but fairly watery because I don't want it to be, I don't want thick Cadbury's purple. I just want to use it as a sort of shadowing element on the surface. It looks a bit red. Let me just get a bit more blue going into that. And I'm using a relatively small brush because we're going to be controlled with this. We're not slapping it on in my usual carefree fashion. Let's see what the colour's like. I'm just going to test it on that one. It's not too bad. It's a bit greyish. A bit more purple in. Yeah, that's better. So I'm just thinking of it as so the shadows, the key sort of shadows that we want to see really are certainly this sort of side of the glass here, and don't forget it's always going to dry a lot paler than you see it when it first goes on. And I'm just going to come round that slurp of ice cream over the edge like that, and then all of this along here, that can be relatively greyish, and I'm ignoring my lines up to a point. I'm just leaving that slice of white through there, remember, because that's going to be our highlight. And because I want the shadow to be there, and then when I put the colours on top, it should change all of them. So I'm going to, having just said I'm not going to use a huge brush, I am using a huge brush, look at that. I'm just going to come in and I want to come down with that shadow. I want to ignore that section there because that's going to have light coming through, down into that ice cream, sort of through there, a little bit there, and then definitely that strong edge kind of through there. So can you see how I've really simplified down the shadow? I've really seen it as just being incredibly sort of, in the most basic areas term. If you're not sure, if you kind of shut your eyes and squint at the picture, you can kind of see where the main areas of light and shadow come, because it kind of simplifies it down. So keep it really sort of simple like that. Then down here, there's that swirl of shadow going around the base. That definitely wants to come in. And then definitely I think these greying shadows round there, and a little bit of shadow on this side. Then looking at the ice cream itself, at the sort of the creamy swirl at the top, can you see the way there's that sort of like lip that comes up? So there's like a little bit in there. That's definitely got to, we want that to be in shadow because that's going to give a lot of form to that swirl at the front. And then round this sort of section, just round the edges of the little pattern that we've seen kind of in there and up into there. There's sort of like almost like a teddy bear head shape, or sort of ears sticking up into that cream. And up on this, just by the cherry, there's like a nice little, like if you imagine sort of freshly fallen snow in a little drift of cream up the top there, which has got a shadow in it, and that just helps to sort of put that bit in, I think. And then this is where we can see the shadow lines on the wafer. So we can put that in. Eventually we'll put a nice ochre wash over this, and it'll become much more the right sort of colour. But we're going to bring those lines in. See, my lines really could have come in a bit closer and have been a bit, but we're just going to go with it. I think if I was again taking more time, I'm going to put all these lines in first, just sort of coming round. As they come round to the right hand side, the shadow gets fainter. So you can use the paint quite dryly, and if it only half appears, that's not a problem. But if you also notice that this side, there's a shadow cast sort of over the whole of that sort of bottom section. For it's the shadow from the creamy bit on top. So if we then just put in like a line of shadow and then just fill all of that in, that will kind of give that feeling of just that moment of shadow coming across from the head of the ice cream. I suppose one would call it a head. And then that edge there, look, on the fan, I just want to get that in where it's just following along my drawn line there, where it's quite dark in there, isn't it? It's quite a strong, definite sort of shape. And then I can just going to make that quite strong. Cherry, looking at the cherry, the shadow is not too strong, but I think it'll work quite well to kind of exaggerate it a bit. So I'm going to put shadow on this left-hand side of the cherry, just sort of a half, lick of shadow in there, just to give that some substance. And then we can sort of look at, I think there's down this side of the glass, we've got a sort of greyness, haven't we? So we can kind of put that in, leaving that slice down the side being much brighter. And I think I can bring the shadow across the front a little bit more, just sort of under that edge. You get a little bit of shadow on the rim of the glass kind of going round, but this side we want to keep that really white. And I can see there's an even darker sort of sweep of shadow kind of coming through on this side, coming down, and again sort of down here. So I think we can add a bit more. At the moment it looks like a very strange sort of pale rhubarby kind of colour, but we're going to give it a moment to dry, and we can start adding some brighter colours over the top. And this way, so we're not really going to be mixing each colour. We're going to be using the colours quite pure and then working over the top of this sort of shadow band, which will hopefully stop them getting muddied and keep the sort of freshness that we want. Right, so at the moment it now looks like a kind of sepia photograph. But I'm going to mute for a second and I'm going to dry it down. Although it's not very wet, I still want it to really be dry before I put any other colours on top. Otherwise, it's going to have the effect of disturbing them and taking the edge off them more than I want. So I want it to be there, but I don't want it to dirty up the colours I'm going to lay over it. So I'm just going to mute for 30 seconds to give it a really quick blast with a hairdryer. And do that. really quickly. I have a message for you, it's urgent. Nikki just messaged me on Facebook to say that Ross's mum has died.
What?
Nikki just messaged me on Facebook to say Ross's mum has died. I'm right in the middle of my class, but I've wanted you to know, so you may want to...
Oh, I better give him a ring.
Right, okay, so that is now dry. Now again, because this is, you know, it's our painting, it's our world, you don't have to always stick to exactly the colours that are there. So you could introduce some really bright, you know, maybe go for like a sort of mint chalk theme or whatever, but I'm going to kind of stick with them because they are there. But again, don't worry too much if you don't get them perfectly. So I think the first thing I'm going to start on is the fan. So as I said, that's probably going to be an ochre kind of colour. And I think with this, because we've got quite a controlled structure, it conversely lets us gives us space to play around with the paint on top. It can be quite, again, go back to being a bit more expressive. So almost like working backwards, aren't we? We're sort of being quite controlled, to begin with, and we're going to expand it into something a bit more sort of jolly. So I don't mind too much when I'm applying this if, you know, this is not a colouring class, you know, like kids' colouring class. So if you don't want to colour inside the lines, it's not the end of the world, is what I'm trying to say. I think it gives it quite a lot of fun. So I'm going to put a little bit of water on top of the wafer first. Just an arc of water around the cherry, but just sort of like so that page is slightly wet. Not worrying too much about where it comes. And then I'm going to put some of my ochre yellow across that top, and hopefully what will happen is that the underpainting will show through and give us the shadow that we need. So I'm just wiping excess off my brush up there, and then just going to follow that shape, not worrying too much if it spreads and it falls, because again, it's sort of, I think this is what gives it its character and its sort of fun, isn't it? Because you can see the shape of it, and then adding that slightly wet paint, it's a little bit hard to see because of course the camera picks up on the water, a shiny surface, and so you miss kind of the effect. Got it to dry a bit and you can see, but I quite like that that's sort of quite lively and wet. And then you can come in with a small brush and add some darker ochre tones. We could even get a little bit of that rusty colour that you may or may not have. So it's quite hard if you haven't got it, I appreciate. But if you have got it, a little bit of that sort of rusty tone into some of these shadow pockets. And see, I'm quite enjoying all these sprays and these bits running down, because for me, it kind of gives you that feeling of melting, doesn't it? It gives you that kind of melting quality, you know, which is all part of ice cream. It all speaks of the kind of whole ice cream experience. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to add a bit more of the ochre with a relative more controlled paint into my fans. So I've got that happening. I quite like this. I mean, you know, it's cool. I'm enjoying it. So that's our wafer. We can come back and add some more detail to that. Let's get a nice scarlet and come in and start picking up on some of these sort of really scarlet areas. So scarlet is definitely that red with a bit of pink, the pinkier end of the red spectrum. So that's what I want to try and get. I'm debating whether to try something a bit mad. I'm always wanting to try something a bit mad. But I'm thinking of like putting quite a wet, a splurge of water on this, and then seeing if these red colours will spread and see what they do, even if they're not exactly the same as the drawn line, because that will give us this, again, this slightly sort of melty quality. So let's do that. Go on. You know, if the worst comes to it, we'll just do another painting. It's fine. So I'm going to put some water into that surface, painting really the red bits, but thinking about where they come. And then let's see what we get. I can't get my red pink enough. It's going a bit orangey. Let me just try that again. Oh, that's definitely orange. Come on, where's my pink? My pinky red. If you want to make, if your red is going too orange and you want to make it a little bit on the pink side, I'm going to add a turquoisey kind of blue, I think. No, that's made it orange. Just ignore me. That's come out terrible. I'm painting on my hand. Look, this is what I'm doing, trying to see it. I don't like any of those. That's better, that one. God, right. So I've got my wet surface. And let's just think there's that very dark bit of red in there, isn't there? So let's let that sort of dabbing it on with a small brush, just letting it bloom into that shape. So it's kind of filling up the shape that I've got, but if it spreads beyond that, it's not going to be a huge problem. And the same in these sort of areas here, come in under that sort of very dark edge here, and then there's that very dark red kind of coming in here, just to sort of move those round. And they've all come out with that sort of slightly darker tone because we put them onto where the underpainting is. We've got this strawberry under here, haven't we, which we see we've got like a dark edge to it sort of round there, but I'm really liking the way some of this is spreading out and sort of moving. I think it gives it a lovely, well, a real sort of melty kind of quality, doesn't it? It makes it feel like it's melting. So let's get all of that strawberry in, and then I'm going to go in with a darker red and go round the edge of it. If you're painting on where it's wet, it's going to hopefully bleed into each other and kind of give that feeling of that you get sort of the edge of the strawberry with the flesh inside being slightly paler. And again, I can come into this dark section here where I've got that little dark note of strawberry. I'm going to get some purple and just dab it on into that wet surface, and then extra pink paint on top just to sort of win it through. But that's going to start giving that sort of dark centre, you know, the dark centre of... Sorry, I'm pausing because it sounds like... keeps in my head this voice is saying that the dark heart of Africa, but I'm thinking the dark heart of the Sunday, which sounds terribly dramatic, doesn't it? Like it's sort of got quite an evil nature. And then if I want to get those to soften a bit more, I can come in with some paint and just get a little bit of extra water on the surface, very watery colour, because I think I'm quite enjoying the way it's sort of moving. Like in here, in this area here, there's like a sort of skin of strawberry sauce just behind the glass, and I can just do a little wash of pink. And maybe in here, look, there's this sort of section here. So where I've got a brush that's basically just water, but with a little bit of pink paint in it, I can come in and just very lightly come across this surface here. I feel this edge here, this could get a bit darker. So I'm going to come in, or it should get a bit darker, should I say. So I'm going to bring in some of that purple wash that I've still got hanging around, just coming in onto that edge, and just following that drawn line. And if it looks like it's too hard, we can always get a little bit of, wash the brush, come in and soften that so it's just becoming that sort of extra shadow kind of coming round there. I've got drips running down mine. I don't mind them, but if you do want to sort of like lift them off the surface, a bit of tissue, just press them on, and they'll kind of, while they're wet, you'll just suck them off the surface, and they'll really lose impact. But I think, you know, I'm going to leave this one because I think there's something. It just reminds me of chocolate sauce running down the glass and that kind of feeling. Right, so I've got those sort of pink shades in. There's something quite orangey happening up here, isn't there? And it's quite sort of bright. So let's come in with an orangey red sort of into this sort of area around here. Sort of be quite bright with it, because again we can soften it with water if we want to. But I think that's sort of quite nice, just seeing that real flash of bright colour coming in. And then we could maybe, we've got that red, haven't we? So let's go back to the red, because there's more of that strawberry sauce colour coming around this side here. And this is coming into the bright white, and you should see, hopefully, that it's much brighter, it's much clearer in compared to the softer kind of shadowed section. And I'm painting it on dry paper as well here, so we're getting that sort of contrast between the two. And I'm going to bring some of that orange in. Let's sort of add up and sort of amp up the drama a bit. This here, there's a little bit of orange down into here as well, and just on that edge, I think here there's quite a sort of glow of it kind of coming around. All through here there is as well. I'm just sort of like, you know, dotting that in kind of quite abstractly just to see how that goes. Right, so those sort of bits there, and then I'm thinking, let's get that chocolate sauce section in, this sort of dark section here. So obviously we've got to hit our chocolate browns, our umbers. It's really, really dark, so, you know, I think, although I relentlessly say don't use black to make things darker, I think because this is a dark chocolate sauce, I think we can add some black into umber to get a really powerful dark. With this one, I'm hoping the surface is dry. You can always dab it with a tissue, because unlike the strawberry, the chocolate doesn't have quite so much of that spreading quality, does it? It's quite opaque and it's quite thick. So I think we can almost just, as a starting point, fill in the shapes that we've drawn for ourselves. Fill that in with the chocolate sauce, so that it's in quite a strong bubble, following that outline near enough, kind of round that edge. You get a nice sort of straight bit there where it's sort of obviously caught against the rim of the glass or the shape of the glass, and then as it comes down into that little trail, it will fade off a little bit. So I'm going to come back and pick that up with a wetter brush. So there's a shape inside this shape, isn't there? Sort of like a I can see like a triangle of pink, so I'm going to leave that out. But let's bring this sort of chocolatey bit in. I think this is the bit that's made my mouth water the most. If anyone's interested, I recently decided to give up eating sugar for health reasons, and I have not had sugar for 3 months now. And I'm not saying this is torture, but apparently it's harder to give up than smoking sugar. It's been all right so far, but this isn't helping. So I'm going to bring into that sort of shape there, and then we've got this lovely chocolate bean of shape below. I think there's less ice cream around it than I've got. It's very close. So the quite good thing about this is when you're painting with a dark shape, you can kind of go, and if you've left too much space, you can kind of go and edit it and sort of make your lines a little bit closer. Now that again you've got the pen to kind of work off. But I'm going to put this dark chocolate shape in kind of here. There we go. So it's real sort of like marbling, and then we've got this little black, almost looks like an exclamation mark, doesn't it? If you look at it now on the photograph, you can see there's like the ball of the exclamation there, and then a little dark bit above, which has actually got a little bit of light coming through, but it's got that feel. I think that's quite sweet. It's almost like an exclamation of like wow going on. There's a tiny bit of chocolate brown in there, so I can bring a paint line just through there, just to sort of hint at the sort of chocolate. And then in these sort of horseshoe shapes here, there's a little shape on the side that's somewhere between chocolate and red, but again, you can't always get all this intense detail in, so you can kind of do an approximation or something that just sort of hints at it. Then in this sort of the darker area up here, there is some sort of dark grey, so I think we can use some of this chocolate paint while it's on the brush just to come in and add that bit of darkness in there. And I think also on the rim, I think if we use the chocolate brown for where we want to bring some darker tones in, rather than going into the greys, I think it will keep the image quite sort of light and bubbly. So again, on this side of the glass, you can just see the top of the rim, you can just see at the edge here, there's quite a strong dark patch there, which I think just helps to sort of bring that into focus. And then again, on the foot of the ring, I think rather than going into grey tones, I think we can bring a little bit of that brown again just into, establishing. And we've got sort of bits around here, haven't we? We've got these little half moon kind of flicker. You might find it easier almost to sort of do these in paint than it is to draw them, just sort of these little moments of where this glass is refracting all these images, and it's got a bit that sort of comes up into there and kind of along and round. And here inside that hoop shape that we noticed earlier, there's a sort of brown hoopy kind of bit coming in there, and they're all sort of hiding in there, little sort of bits. And there's a second row of those, isn't there? So we can use our fine brushes and come sort of flicking along just sort of in some of those shapes. And that bigger, whiter kind of hoop in there's one. If we then put a little bit brown either side of it, that starts to make that stand out a bit more. And there's a wiggle of sort of darkness coming through, kind of up like that there. So all of that has given a bit more sort of texture, a bit more sort of shadow. And I think, again, with this wafer at the top, we can use the chocolate brown. Oh, look, I've smudged it. Oh, well. We're going to go with that. That's fine. To bring a line of shadow, stronger shadow, but with a smaller brush, just coming across edge to help give it some, although it's very thin, it does have a 3D quality. And if you actually use it relatively dryly, so some of the paper texture comes through, then it kind of helps to give that feeling of the surface of the wafer. And I think we could get, now that you can see the first layer of ochre has dried on the wafer, I think we could come back in again with the smaller brush and just bring in another layer of ochre on top of those sort of shadowed areas. Don't forget the little bit that we picked out that's you know, that's a bit sort of stronger in there. I think we can come and just make these a bit more defined now. I haven't got enough really, I should have put more in, but as in, you know, the rays need to be a little bit closer together and a bit thinner, but you know, I think it still works as an ice cream. And a little hint of other colours kind of come, of that sort of shadow. I think it can be quite bold. As we come round again, it's gonna there's less shadow, so that the paint can stay light. I think we can just have it in this sort of section round here. Maybe warm up that colour in between a little bit. And again, if your brush is quite dry on this surface, leaving some of the paper texture to come through kind of helps to give it that sort of wafery feel. Now we definitely need to put the cherry in, because it's the literal cherry on top, isn't it? And I think it needs to be there to kind of start to locate all the other sort of reds and the colours and things. So let's come in with that cherry. So we've still got the underpainting there. I'm going to leave the top bit of it white to begin with, and just to sort of try, and that's come out way too orange, dull looking. I want a much brighter red than that. Sorry, my brush obviously wasn't as clean as I want it to be. Let's come back in with some fresh paint. That's better. I don't want it to be too brown. Luckily that was a shadow bit, so we can pretend that was shadow. Yeah, that's better. So over the top, leave a little white at the moment, because I'm going to soften that. I don't want it to be too, I want to leave a kind of highlight on the top, and then, but bring that sort of in a nice pure crimson kind of paint in. So that's starting to get that almost like a nose on the rocket in. And then to do the highlight, I don't want it to be completely white because it's too pure, but I've got just a wet brush and just a little bit of the paint that's there. I'm just going to bring that across the top to make it pink, so the highlight becomes pink on the cherry, and that's just enough to give it a highlight, but not to make it too bright and sort of too white, because otherwise it would look a tiny bit too artificial. I've just got a ball of paint building up on here, threatening to run down, so I'm going to just lift it off a little bit. That's just taken some of the pink out, but I can come back with the drier paint and just flick that in again. I was almost tempted to let that run down because it would have a real sort of strawberry kind of sauce feel to it. And again, now that the first layer of this sort of strawberry painting has gone on, it's again, after about 10 minutes, it's dried out a bit more, so it's paler. So I can come back in and with a quite dry paint and a fine brush. This is where we can start sort of fine tuning, getting some more colour into these strawberry areas. So into the shapes that we see, and you can see that the paint put on first, where it's very runny and sort of spready, it's given us that kind of wash of pink, and now we can come in with a bit more detail and a bit more oomph in the colour and bring those sort of details up a bit. And into this sort of mass of pink around here, we just need to get a bit more pink into our surface so that it's starting to have that, you know, mouth-watering colour kind of coming through here. I can see the more you look at something, the more you start to see little details and moments you can put in. I think we can get a bit more pink just sort of washing onto the surface here. Again, put it on, and if you think it's too strong, you can always add some water to kind of clean it back again, but I'm kind of go with that. I think that's working quite well. And just sort of bring, and then let's have a look at the strawberry down here. Yeah, I think I can get some. I want to go another layer on top of that to kind of enhance that up and bring some extra strawberry power into it here. And I want to get on this side somewhere, I want to get a little that shape there. I'm going to make that into strawberry pink as well, because then that's got that feeling of the strawberry kind of being pressed across both those surfaces. Right, and then I want to get some more into these sort of hoop shapes. I'm going to use the pink so that it's moving through, so that I've got that reflective feel, but I'm going to bring some of the colour in here so that it's pinker. And we're going to have to think about what background we're going to get in here as well, because that's going to affect the colour. The picture has got a very sort of neutral, rather beigey colour on it, and I'm thinking we can play with that a bit and do something a bit different, just to bring a sort of, make the whole overall image a bit more sort of lively and a bit more summery. So I'm going to look at some of a few shadows in the cream, and then I think we're going to have a look at how we can sort of ramp things up a bit with a different, more contrasted background. There's that dark area there up in that top edge. I think that needs to come in. It is quite a greyish colour, but I'm going to use the chocolate brown, but maybe a bit more watery to begin with, just to bring some of that in. It's quite a strong colour. It's sort of funny how dark it is when you start to look at it. And then there's that little sort of shape in between doing its thing, and then that edge there has got quite a lot of darkness. There's quite a shadow actually sort of coming all the way down here. That's going to come in. And then we've got this gap here, haven't we? I'm going to pause with that gap. I'm going to come back to it when we've got some background in, because the background's going to throw in an extra colour, which is going to sort of give us some more highlights to play with. I think, you know, this is a thing with photographs. This is great, but I think if I was staging this myself and was actually going to, and I was very tempted today for research purposes to go down to Creams in my local ice cream place and order a massive sundae to photograph, because obviously it would have been research and then it would have been a shame, but I didn't do that. But, you know, I think we could have had I think changing the background a bit will really sort of finish it off. So just in the sort of the creamy sort of centre up here, I want to get some watery down turquoise, so a blue but quite a watery blue in the surface, because I want it to be like a sort of pale wash. This may come out too strong, but I think we'll go with it, just to sort of bring on this surface here some of these sort of shadows, like up round this cream area and sort of round in here. If you think it's too heavy or it's going too strong, again, grab a bit of tissue and just lift it back off the surface, but not too much. I think you want some colour in there. This area here, we've got like a sort of a shelf in the cream, and that can come in, I think that can come in darker, because you want that contrast to show the whiteness of where that cream is, sort of round here. And then I can add some more. It's amazing how the more you look, the more dramatic that some of these colours become in here, and you want to kind of reflect those. But I'm going to pause and think about the background, because I'd quite like to put some blue or some maybe sort of minty green kind of colours in around the background. And if we do put those colours in, then I think we want to see some of them reflected into the glass, just to sort of get that idea of reflected colour. My dribble down the side, I'm just going to finally kill it off just with a bit of tissue there. So I want to get, I think, something like a minty green or a turquoise, just sort of washed in to give a hint of a table in a different sort of colour. I think that will be a nice contrast, and then I think we can bring some of those colours into this area here, because at the moment, if you look at the picture, what we're seeing through here are the reflected colours of the table. And the table in this one is this sort of murky pinky grey colour, which is not very dramatic. So if we're going to add some turquoise in around here, then we can use the turquoise tones to come into this bottom section and sort of like just ramp up the contrast a bit. So I'm going for some clean water so that I'm not hopefully going to muddy up my green. And I'm thinking of that sort of real, I don't know if I'm going to achieve it, but I want that kind of bright minty, something that's green and minty and bright. So something that's a bright green, then with a bit of turquoise blue kind of mixed into it, that sort of colour. You know, that sort of, what I'm trying to go for is that quite fresh sort of seaside feel. So I'm just going to bring that green coming in and around, so that it's just adding, it's quite pale because it's a wash, but we can at least, you know, we can amp it up a bit later, and we can decide on a sort of horizon line as far as our painting is concerned. Hang on, I've got to move my photograph over a bit. But then it's just going to give us some background. And I think, as I say, it's always surprising how important backgrounds are. You know, the word background gives the feeling that it's sort of, you know, we use it to mean something in the background, don't we? Something not terribly important, or something that's just sort of niggling away behind us. But I think actually backgrounds are extremely important. So let's get some lovely greens, and we can be quite free and kind of, we can get some nice blooms kind of happening on that maybe. So once you've got that sort of in, let's be quite abstract with it, mixing up some slightly more bluer turquoise to come in and just sort of bring those around there. And we can add a bit of water to get some movement happening on the surface, so it's not just a static background, just sort of. And then once you've got those sort of colours in, so I'm going to let that background do its thing while I'm carrying on, we can bring some of those colours into the bottom of the glass. So we can start picking up hints of green kind of coming in around some of these sort of details. Remember to leave some areas quite white because you want to bring sort of some highlights in, but that then gives us that sort of nice reflected colour, and the base of the glass is going to become all these shades of green that are matching your background. So while you've got your background colour mixed up, then you can use that to come in to bring that colour into the line work and into sort of round here. And again, I painted that shadow in so I can put green over the top, and I think that's just sort of a bit more interesting than having that sort of beigey colour going on. And then with these large shapes here that I've worked out, I'm going to leave some of them white, but just bring some of that colour. And where we've got the brown here, we can bring that greeny sort of blue colour kind of coming through. So we're getting that colour. And where we're also going to see is where it comes up this side here, where we've got this big reflective area. It's almost sort of hollow. So the green colours are going to come up inside so it's like transmitting up inside the glass, and that sort of helps to give that reflective kind of feel. I think I want to get my floor perhaps a tiny bit more bluey, so I can bring some blue shades into the body of the ice cream a bit more. So again, I've got that. I'm going too dark with these backgrounds. I'm trying to get something ice creamy and light. It's got a bit sort of forest green, but there we go. So let's bring. No, it's a bit too mucky. Well, you know, I think I need to go for some pure turquoise over the top and not mix any green in it to get that a bit brighter. I can just bring, again, love the square brush, come into that edge and whiz the paint away from it, and it sort of really helps to draw that kind of edge in. Yeah, I think I want something. I'm going to get some turquoise without the green in it, some blue in on there. It's such an iconic summer colour. Well, we hope it is. I mean, this summer it's not been very turquoise blue anywhere, really, has it? But anyway, let's just get some of that blue and see what that does. Yeah, that's sort of, I'm quite liking that. But as we know, I like my drips. But I'm just going to bring some of that in, because there's something, you know, this is why watercolour is different from other paints. You know, they all have their things and the skills that surface in the qualities that they bring to image making. And I just think the way that watercolour drips and runs, it's just so exciting. I know it's people that don't understand this look at me blankly when I say, but it's so amazing because it drips and runs and you get these beautiful blooms of colour, and they sort of go, oh, okay. And you go, no, trust me, it's wonderful. I'm going to bring some of that darker colour in round the base like that. We could think about some shadow on the table, but let's see. Let's get some of this blue tone coming into the base now, so I can bring in, so where it's got darkness, I can bring that sort of lick of blue coming through the surface there, and then again round that edge where it's too white, let's come in and darken that down a bit, and over the top of that brown we can bring some blue, and up into the glass again down towards the edges we can get some blue reflective detail coming through, just sort of coming up into the glass. And on this side too, here we sort of get a little, this heap of brown, we can put some blue over that, and this shadow coming up here. So we're starting to see some of those blue colours. And what's throwing me off is, look, I've left a corner of green, look, where I haven't gone around the edge of that glass, and if I just take that off, that works much better, doesn't it? Ridiculous. That's a tiny detail, but that was really throwing off because you couldn't tell whether it was the glass or whether it was the table was being weird. And I think through this sort of dark section we can, oh, I can't get my hand on there without getting covered in paint, so I'm going to have to sort of float my hand in just to get some blue into that, where I got the dark brown before. I want to bring some more blue tones into that, and we can be quite dramatic. There's a bit of blue coming in, or I'm going to decide that it's blue, and then we've got those shapes coming down the sides, coming round. And into these sort of areas here, just maybe a little bit on the base and along under here. Fabulous. Right, okay, so that's got some blue, and I think what I'd like to do is, there's still quite a strong shadow kind of just through across the whole thing on this edge, so I'm going to attempt just to wash some turquoise up across this side. I think maybe like with a flat brush coming all the way up here. I really need something cleaner as a palette, so I'm just going to grab one of my clean cups and just make sure I've got some really pure turquoise mixed up, that anything else kind of getting in its way. There we go. So blue and clean water in the bottom. Really good. I'm just going to give my brush a really good wash in the clean water and dry it off before I do this. And I think we can get some more red into the cherry. I'm thinking now that again that's dried back again, I think we need to amp up our cherry. So clean brush, clean water, trying to make a wash up of a turquoise. This is one of these moments where I need to have 800 tables around me in 3 hands, because I'm trying to juggle all these things onto the surface and not have them drop on the floor. This is why artists have such messy studios, because you've got so many things you want to have to hand when you're in the moment. So a wash of turquoise, which hopefully is a very pure colour and not too messed up. So I'm just going to be bold, bring the brush over the surface and down, and that might be too watery because I don't think you can see anything at all happening with that. Let's try again. You know, be bold, she says, being really nervous. Right, so let's come up through here. There we go. Just take that up into that. There we go. I think that's just adding, hopefully, that sort of the sort of screen of the glass over the top. Now I think the foot of my glass is still a bit weird. It's still not quite the right shape, but you know. So I'm going to, but on this one, I'm also going to put a sweep of kind of blue across that surface, just to sort of get that into a more kind of like give an overall surface. A little bit too much white on the pedestal, so I'm just going to leave a little tiny bit and knock the rest back with a wash. Right, okay, so let's go back up to the top. I quite like that big stripe through. I think it's really helped to kind of give that feeling of it being in a glass. Although I haven't managed to get my colours quite as ice creamy as I wanted. It's quite difficult with watercolours. They really do. They are really quite muted in their application. But I think when it's dry, I think this has given it a really nice shadow through it. So let's come back and let's start with the cherry. Nice, not too wet paint. Quite dry-ish paint, so we can add some extra cherry power into that red. And again, what I'm going to do is put in the shadow, but I'm still going to leave that top part as the paler pink, just to be the highlight in there. So let's get that in a bit sort of stronger. While I've got pink on my brush, I'm going to come back and start adding a third layer of sort of pink tones into some of this, maybe just seeing the little other bits that I've missed that I want to get in, just with some more pink, just to bring up that strawberry quality. Maybe some sort of in here, maybe coming around here. Obviously I'm on quite a few Facebook discussion groups around art and stuff that I sort of float in and out of and keep an eye on, and most of the time I ignore, but someone put a post up, someone was talking about, put the question up, how do you know when you finished a piece of art? And somebody put replied to say, well, my art teacher said to me, if you're looking at a picture thinking, I think it needs just one more thing, stop, because it doesn't. So I think that's quite a good lesson to think about. I can get a few more, I think it needs a couple more things, you see. So I think it's that last thing you need to not put in, is what they were saying, because then it's always the last thing. The last thing you think of doing is the thing that's a bit too much. So I'm going to come in with some lilac-y shadow tones again, just to add a little bit more definition to this sort of area of cream at the top. It's funny how when you start looking at it, it does become more and more like sort of ski slopes. There's actually quite a lot of structure in it, and using a little bit of lilac-y shadow to sort of help outline that. But I don't want it, I want it to be really quite watery, the paint. It's going to, because I want it to be quite subtle. I don't want to come in and put great purple stripes on it. But I think again, coming into here, into that sort of overhang underneath there, to add that up, I think I can bring some a little bit more shadow into this sort of area here, and maybe fade it off so that we've only really got whiteness in this sort of portion here. Oh, I was going on about that bit here, wasn't I? And what I want to do is that bit, is to put some of the turquoise colour in there, but I'm going to come back to that when I've got a clean brush. So then in the actual cream here, there's a sort of ball of shadow just on that edge there, and we've got, so I think we can amp up the shadow in some of these folds and twists and spirals through here, just sort of coming round there. And again, don't worry if they're too hard or they feel too hard at the moment. They're actually they're surprisingly strong against that white background, and we can always wet them down to sort of soften them and make them less dramatic. But put them in to be quite dramatic at first, because they will fade out. And I think I'm going to put a general kind of light wash over that side to give it a bit more sort of structure. And then if I think it's too strong, I can come back with, this is a brush with just water on it, and I can just sort of flick up and soften those shadows so they're not too patchy. Blend them into the white sort of surface that we've got. We've lost a bit of cream around there to the wafer where it ran a bit, but I'm not worried about that too much. I think there's a little bit of shadow again on here, so I can just pinch a tiny bit of that just to sort of bring that. So I think when you're painting something that's pure white, don't be frightened to see the shadows in it and to exaggerate them if you need to, because it will help. There is structure in white, in the mounds of whiteness, whether it's snow or whipped cream. Then up here, this little sort of hole through, I'm going back to the turquoisey colours that I've mixed up for the base of my ice cream to stand on, and I'm going to just come in and leaving that white edge just where the glass is, but then just bring some of those in so that it becomes a hole through into a backdrop, or maybe reflecting some colour. And I can bring some of those blue tones into this area of sort of reflected colour on there as well, and then maybe again just add some blue into some of those glass shadows that we've got, just sort of coming round there. And then, oh look, down in here at this bottom there is actually quite a lot of green in there on the picture, so I'm going to bring a bit more sort of darkness and green into that, I think. And it'd be nice to get a background colour in here as well, because I think that will help this edge to come up, but I want something different to this base. So I'm thinking of, let's just do like maybe like a pale peachy kind of wash around the ice cream in total, although that would kind of lose my drip here, which I quite like, but I think we're going to have to sacrifice it. So I'm going to go for, I want a contrast to the floor colour that I've put in, or the base colour. So I'm just hopefully going to mix up a light sort of orangey colour and just come in and come round that edge of the cream round there and bring that down the side of the glass, and then just take it away into the dry paper, just then whiz that away, just so that I've got, there is a bit of tone on that, and it's not just white paper. So though that's quite subtle and you can't really see it on the camera, it is more obvious in the actual painting, and I think it's just enough of a bloom of colour just to finish that off. And I think same on this side, let's just take that It's come out a bit stronger, but I don't mind that at all. But I can just leave that white edge of the glass and bring that around here. So it's got a slightly stronger colour on one side, which I quite like. But it's just enough just to lift, just to have a background in, I think. And you can have more fun with it. You can add more colour. You know, you could add some ice cream signs. But I think we're pretty much coming to the end of our paint today. So there we go. So I'm hoping that what we've seen with this is that we've got these very sort of subtle pastel colours. We can kind of do the shadow underpainting first to kind of help put the structure in, and then the colours go on top and we get that kind of ice cream feel, and that some of these nice blooms and smudges and things just really add to the effect of all that deliciousness shoved down inside a big glass. So there we go. This is our Sunday ice cream sundae painting.